Imagine uncovering your spouse's secret affair with a celebrity, only to realize the truth runs even deeper than you feared. This is the story of how one shocking discovery led to a journey I never expected. It all started on a night that was supposed to be one of our best. My wife, Emma, and I were at a concert, her favorite band's farewell tour. She had always been a fan of music, especially live shows, and this particular band held a special place in her heart. I wasn't as into them as she was, but seeing her light up, singing every word, was worth every minute. The night was electric, the energy in the arena alive. I kept watching her, thrilled by how carefree she seemed, totally in the moment. But something strange happened right as the band left the stage. Emma leaned over to me, practically buzzing with excitement, and whispered, "I'll be right back. I just want to try and get a photo near backstage." It seemed odd. Emma was usually one to avoid crowds and the craziness of backstage scenes, and yet here she was, darting off without much of an explanation. I waited, scanning the crowds, expecting her to reappear within a few minutes. But 10 minutes went by, then 20, and then almost half an hour. I sent a quick text to check if everything was okay, but there was no response. Eventually, she reappeared, looking a little flushed but smiling, clutching her phone tightly. She waved it triumphantly, telling me she had managed to snag a picture of herself near the band's dressing room. I felt a bit of relief but also a strange twinge, a feeling that I couldn't quite explain. The concert wrapped up, and we went home, but her behavior that night kept creeping into my mind, leaving me with a gnawing curiosity that would only grow over the next few weeks. A couple of weeks after the concert, Emma's excitement hadn't died down. She talked about that night constantly, replaying every detail as if it had just happened. She was more animated than usual, almost radiant. One night as we were winding down, she brought it up again. "Did I tell you?" she said, trying to sound casual but failing. One of the band's managers reached out after the show. I'd given him my email, just in case they did more local shows. She waved her hand as if this was something everyone did. And, well, he mentioned they might have some VIP passes available for superfans next time. My first reaction was to laugh. It seemed a little over the top. Sure, she loved the band, but this was something she'd never done before. She was a fan, yes, but she'd never been one to chase after VIP access or even push her way to the front of the stage. "Oh really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "VIP access for superfans, huh?" She shrugged, brushing it off with a smile. "Just thought it was fun," she said, laughing. But something about the way her laughter faded left me wondering if there was more to the story. I didn't press her, though. Instead, I tried to let it go. Maybe this was just a phase, I thought. We all have those moments when we get a bit caught up in something exciting. But then, she started texting late into the night. When I'd walk into the room, she'd quickly put her phone away or angled the screen just out of view, her face lighting up in a way that wasn't typical. I didn't want to assume the worst, but I couldn't help feeling uneasy. There was a shift in her energy, an excitement she didn't seem to want to share with me, and my gut was telling me that this wasn't just about being a superfan anymore. Over the next few days, Emma's late-night texting didn't let up. If anything, it grew more frequent. She would disappear into another room or step out onto the balcony with her phone in hand, speaking in hushed tones. When I'd ask her who she was talking to, she'd brush it off with a quick, "Just some friends from the fan group," or "someone from work." But the evasiveness was unlike her, and it set off alarm bells in my mind. One evening, I decided to casually test her. "Why don't we go through some of your concert photos? I'd love to see that backstage pic you took that night," I suggested. Her face tensed for a fraction of a second before she broke into a smile. "Oh, sure. Let me grab my phone," she said, disappearing into the bedroom to fetch it. She was gone longer than expected, and when she finally returned, she handed me her phone, opened only to a handful of generic photos from our night at the concert, nothing of her near the backstage or dressing room, as she'd claimed. "Where's the one you took by the dressing room?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She frowned, flipping through her photos. "That's weird. I thought I saved it." "Must have accidentally deleted it," she mumbled, almost too casually. The explanation felt flimsy, but I decided not to push further. Maybe it was innocent. But the next day, I noticed something odd. Emma was much more protective of her phone. She'd keep it face down, even around the house, and took it with her everywhere, even when she stepped into the next room for just a few minutes. As the days passed, the uneasy feeling only grew. It felt like there was a wall between us, and every time I tried to chip away at it, she'd find some way to dodge. I was beginning to feel like an outsider in my own marriage, kept on the outskirts of a world she didn't want me to see. And whatever was happening on the other side of that wall was becoming too big to ignore. One Friday evening, just as I was getting ready to head home from work, I got a message from Emma. "I need to go out of town for a couple of days. It's for work, last minute. I'll be back on Sunday." Emma rarely traveled for work, and when she did, she usually told me well in advance. This last-minute trip caught me off guard. I called her immediately, wanting to get more details, but she didn't pick up. A few minutes later, she texted back saying she was swamped getting things together and would call me once she was on the road. That night, she called while I was making dinner. Her voice was casual, but there was an edge of excitement she couldn't hide. "It's a quick trip," she said, keeping her explanation vague. "One of those big corporate meetings with some higher-ups." "Which higher-ups?" I asked, curious. Her tone made it sound important, yet she was light on specifics. "Oh, you wouldn't know them. They're people I don't usually work with," she replied, dismissively. Then she changed the topic, asking about my day, filling the conversation with small talk as if to avoid more questions. After we hung up, the feeling of unease that had been growing over the past few weeks hit me hard. Something felt terribly wrong. This wasn't the Emma I knew, her excitement, her secrecy, and the way she seemed almost distant. Like she was keeping a part of herself hidden from me. Determined to put my suspicions to rest, I checked her social media that night. She hadn't posted anything about the trip or work, which was unusual. Emma was typically open online, sharing details of her day-to-day life with friends and family. But her accounts were quiet, like she was trying to keep this part of her life separate from the one we shared. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check her location using the shared tracking app we had on our phones, a precaution we'd set up years ago for safety during her evening commutes. As I pulled up her location, my heart sank. She was in a city 3 hours away, staying at a luxury hotel known for hosting celebrities and high-profile events. My mind raced, wondering why her work trip had taken her to such an upscale place. And then, an unsettling thought crept in: was this really a work trip at all? Unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, I couldn't stop myself from digging further. I called her office the next morning, casually asking if Emma was reachable. The receptionist hesitated before replying, "Oh, Emma isn't on a work trip. She actually requested time off for the weekend. She'll be back on Monday." The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd lied, not just about her whereabouts, but about everything. This wasn't a work trip, and the secrecy suddenly felt sinister. I didn't know what Emma was really up to, but I was determined to find out. Later that evening, I tracked her location again. She was still at the luxury hotel in a nearby city. My instincts screamed that whatever she was hiding, it was something big. I threw some things into a bag, got in the car, and made the drive. If she was lying to me like this, I needed to see it for myself. I arrived at the hotel late that night, parking a short distance away to avoid drawing any attention. This place was upscale, the kind of hotel where high-profile guests valued their privacy. I waited in the car, watching the comings and goings in the lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Hours passed, but finally, I saw her, Emma, stepping out of a private elevator on the side of the building, wearing an elegant outfit that I'd never seen before. She looked different, almost unrecognizable, like she was stepping into another life. She wasn't alone, but the man with her wasn't immediately visible, shielded by an umbrella and the shadows. Only when he moved closer to the valet did I catch sight of his face. It was a famous actor, someone we both watched in movies countless times. Known for being discreet, he moved with the confidence of someone used to staying out of the public eye. As they approached a sleek black car, he placed a hand gently on her back, guiding her as they slipped into the vehicle, their eyes carefully averted from any onlookers. I stayed frozen, watching as they drove off, my mind spiraling with questions. The casual touch, the shared secrecy, it all spoke of something far more intimate than work. Emma had an entire life she was hiding, a world of luxury and fame that had somehow pulled her away from our marriage. The realization felt like a physical blow. I didn't follow them, instead, I sat there, staring at the spot where they'd just been, feeling as if my entire world had just been ripped apart. I knew now that this wasn't just a fling, Emma was living a double life, and I was about to become the last to know. I sat there in my car, numb, watching as their vehicle faded into the distance. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I could hardly breathe. Everything felt surreal, like I was outside my own life, watching it unravel from a distance. But as the shock settled, a cold determination took hold. I couldn't confront her yet, not here, not now, and certainly not without undeniable proof. I needed to be smart about this. If I was going to confront Emma, I wanted her to have no way out, no excuse to twist the story. I needed real, concrete evidence. The next morning, I reached out to a private investigator. After a brief meeting and a quick explanation of my suspicions, he nodded. He'd handled cases like this before, he assured me, and he promised I'd have answers soon. I provided him with as much information as possible, Emma's work schedule, our shared phone plan with her recent locations, and even the name of the actor I'd seen her with. The investigator didn't seem surprised at the mention of a celebrity, if anything, it seemed to solidify his confidence that he could get what I needed. Days passed, each one feeling longer than the last. Emma was back home, acting like everything was normal, as if she hadn't been with someone else just days before. I could see the way her face would light up when she checked her phone or the way she'd sometimes disappear for an hour or two, claiming to be running errands. I said nothing, holding back the questions and anger that were building inside me, knowing that I'd have my answers soon enough. Then, finally, the investigator called. He had what I was looking for. I met him in a small cafe on the outskirts of town, where he handed me a folder. Inside were photos, timestamps, and details I hadn't even anticipated. He'd captured photos of Emma meeting the actor at a private restaurant, of the two slipping into a hotel through a back entrance. There were images of them at a secluded beachside villa where they thought they were safe from prying eyes, relaxed and completely at ease in each other's company. But what struck me most was a set of messages he'd managed to retrieve through her social media account. Reading them felt like a knife to the heart. She wasn't just involved with him physically, she was sharing pieces of herself that I thought were ours alone. There were messages about her dreams, her frustrations, things she never shared with me. And worst of all, she spoke about their escape from the normal life she felt trapped in. It was as if she had compartmentalized me into this small, convenient box in her life, while she lived out some fantasy with him, as if I was a bystander in my own marriage. Clutching the folder, I realized the confrontation was inevitable. I couldn't ignore this, couldn't pretend that things would just return to normal. With the truth in hand, I knew what I had to do next, make her face the reality she'd been hiding from me and from herself. I returned home that night with the folder in my bag, feeling the weight of it pressing into my shoulder like a physical burden. Emma was in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone and humming a tune, as if she hadn't just blown up our entire life. "Hey," she said brightly, looking up as I entered. She smiled, The same warm, familiar smile I'd loved for years, but now, it felt hollow. I felt a surge of anger but forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to tip her off, yet. "Can we sit and talk for a minute?" I said, my voice carefully measured. She looked at me, a slight hint of concern flickering in her eyes. "Sure. Is everything okay?" I led her to the living room, setting my bag down next to the couch and taking a deep breath. I could feel my pulse racing, my hands clenching involuntarily. "There's something I need to understand," I began, keeping my voice steady. "I need you to be completely honest with me." She looked away, her expression wary. "What's this about?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, laying it on the coffee table between us. "This is about where you really were last weekend," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. Emma's face paled, and her eyes darted toward the folder, her hands shifting uncomfortably in her lap. What is this?" she stammered, trying to keep her composure, but the fear was clear in her eyes. "Go on, open it," I said, gesturing to the folder. She hesitated, reaching out with trembling hands. As she opened the folder, her eyes widened, her face draining of color as she flipped through the photos, the screenshots, and the timestamps. The evidence was undeniable, her lies laid out in stark, irrefutable detail. "Is there anything you want to say to me, Emma?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She closed the folder, her hand still resting on it, eyes downcast. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she finally said, her voice shaking. "I was just drawn to him. It wasn't supposed to get this far." "So it's true, then?" I said, feeling the anger and heartbreak boiling beneath the surface. "You've been seeing him. You lied to me, lied about everything, and for what? To live some fantasy life?" Emma took a deep breath, her gaze still fixed on the floor. He made me feel alive," she said softly. "I felt trapped here, like I was just going through the motions. I never planned for it to happen, but here we are," I interrupted, bitterness seeping into my tone. "You chose him. You chose some glamorous escape over everything we built together." She finally looked up, her face a mixture of guilt and defiance. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think you'd understand." I stared at her, struggling to process her words. The woman sitting across from me felt like a stranger, someone who'd chosen to betray not just me, but the life we'd spent years building together. I realized then that the person I thought I knew, the person I thought I could trust, was gone. In her place was someone I could barely recognize. With one last look, I stood up, picking up the folder and walking out of the room. This wasn't over, but I needed a moment to clear my head, to figure out how to move forward from the wreckage of what was once my life. I spent the night in our guest room, lying awake, the folder of evidence resting on the nightstand like a dark reminder of everything that had unraveled. The silence felt suffocating, each passing hour stretching into the next as I replayed our confrontation over and over in my mind. How did we get here? How had I not seen the signs until it was too late? The next morning, Emma knocked softly on the door. I didn't answer, but she came in anyway, her expression subdued, almost as if she had aged overnight. She sat down across from me, taking a deep breath as if to steady herself. "I owe you the full truth," she began, her voice trembling. "I was wrong to hide it, and I was wrong to lie to you. But it wasn't just some fling. I got caught up in something that felt bigger than myself, and I didn't know how to stop it." I listened, holding back the wave of emotions surging through me. "How long has this been going on, Emma?" Her gaze dropped to the floor, and after a long pause, she whispered, "It's been a few months." She winced as she said it, as if the words physically pained her. "At first, it was just talking. He'd reach out occasionally, and I thought it was innocent, you know. Just friendly messages. But then he invited me out, and one thing led to another. I didn't expect it to go this far. I swallowed hard, feeling as though the room was spinning. So you didn't just lie about last weekend. You've been lying for months. She nodded, barely able to look at me. I don't know how to explain it, she said, her voice cracking. I felt trapped in this life. It was all so predictable. And with him, it felt exciting, like I was someone else, even if only for a little while. I felt my fists clench as her words sank in. You felt trapped with me? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. After everything we built together, after everything we shared, you felt the need to escape, to live some other life. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. It sounds terrible, but, yes. And I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't make sense. I didn't want to hurt you, and I didn't want it to end like this. End like this? I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief. You didn't want it to end like this, but you kept lying to me, sneaking around with him as if I didn't exist. She flinched, wiping away her tears. I know, and it's unforgivable. But I want you to know that I never stopped caring about you. I lost myself somewhere along the way. We sat in silence, her words hanging heavy in the air. I had always thought of our marriage as a partnership, a bond that could withstand anything. But now, I could see that the foundation we'd built was cracked, fragile, and that I was holding on to something that no longer existed. I finally looked at her, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I don't think I can forgive this, Emma. I don't know if I'll ever be able to. She nodded, her face etched with sorrow and resignation. I understand, she whispered. And whatever you decide, I'll accept it. With that, she left the room, leaving me alone with the shattered pieces of our life. After she left the room, I sat there, feeling hollow and lost. Emma's confession hung in the air, a harsh reminder of everything we'd been through, everything we'd built and how quickly it had all come crashing down. I realized that I was left at a crossroads, one path leading toward forgiveness, an attempt at piecing together what was left, and the other toward walking away for good. I spent hours alone, replaying our memories, both good and bad, in my mind. How had we gone from being inseparable to sitting in separate rooms, feeling like strangers? Part of me wanted to believe that we could fix this, that she could somehow prove that our relationship was worth saving. But another part of me, the part that had seen those photos, read those texts, knew that what she had done had fractured something deep and irreparable. By late afternoon, I needed air. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, letting the crisp breeze clear my head. I walked aimlessly, each step heavy with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. Was there anything left to salvage, or would it only prolong the inevitable heartbreak? I wondered if forgiving her would ever be possible, or if I'd spend the rest of my life questioning her loyalty. Just as I was lost in thought, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down, half expecting another message from Emma, another desperate plea. But it wasn't from her. Instead, it was from a friend, one I hadn't spoken to in months. Somehow, they'd heard about the situation, the scandal, the affair, and they reached out, offering support, a shoulder to lean on. The message was simple: I heard what happened. Don't go through this alone. Let's meet up. I'm here for you. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Maybe I didn't have to make this decision alone. I had friends, people who cared, who would help me see things clearly when I couldn't see straight on my own. Maybe it was time to lean on them, to allow myself to be vulnerable and accept the support I needed. I replied with a quick, "Thanks, I'd really appreciate that," and set a time to meet them the next day. The thought of sharing my burden, of hearing an outside perspective, gave me a glimmer of relief. As I made my way back home, I knew that I couldn't rush this decision. Whatever I chose, it would shape the rest of my life. And for the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt like I was no longer trapped in a choice between betrayal and heartbreak. I had a path forward, and whether Emma was part of it or not, I was determined to rebuild something meaningful, something real. The next day, I met my friend, Sam, at a small cafe on the edge of town. We'd known each other for years, but the past few months had been so busy with Emma and my work that I'd lost touch with nearly everyone. Sitting across from him, I felt the weight of everything settle a bit lighter on my shoulders. Sam listened intently, not interrupting, as I laid out every painful detail, the late nights, the strange behavior, the concert, the photos, and finally, her confession. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "I can't imagine what you're going through," he said. "But I've got to ask you something, and I need you to be brutally honest with yourself." I looked at him, waiting. "Do you think you'll ever trust her again?" "Like, really trust her?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. I swallowed, thinking over his question. Trust had been the foundation of everything I shared with Emma, and now it felt like it had crumbled into dust. Could I rebuild it, knowing she'd chosen someone else, someone she'd hidden so deeply from me that it took hiring an investigator to uncover it? "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Part of me wants to, but I can't shake the feeling that the person I thought she was, that person isn't real anymore. It's like I was in love with someone who doesn't even exist." Sam nodded slowly. "I think you already know what you need to do," he said gently. "But it's okay if you're not ready. Take it one day at a time." His words resonated deeply. Maybe I did know the answer, but facing it meant confronting a future I wasn't sure I was ready for. After an hour of talking, we left the cafe, and he gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "No matter what you decide, you've got people here who care about you," he said. "Don't let her take that from you, too." I went home that day feeling stronger, more resolute. I wasn't alone in this, and even if it took time, I knew I could piece together a life on my own terms, a life without betrayal lurking in the shadows. A few days later, Emma approached me, her face full of tension. She'd been walking on eggshells around the house, clearly sensing my growing distance, and this time she seemed determined to get through to me. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, bracing myself. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do anything to try and rebuild what we had. Counseling, time apart, whatever you need." I looked at her, the familiar face that once meant the world to me, now shadowed with regret. I searched her eyes for some hint of the person I'd fallen in love with, the woman who had been my partner, my confidant, my best friend. But every memory of that person was tainted now, colored by lies and secrecy. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why do you want to fix this only after you've destroyed it?" Her face fell, and she seemed to struggle for words. "Because I finally see what I was blind to all along," she said, her voice cracking. "I was selfish. I took you and our life for granted. I thought I needed something else, something exciting, but I was wrong. And I realize now that I've lost the only thing that actually mattered." I let her words sink in, but my heart was unmoved. The hurt was too deep, too raw. Could I ever see past what she'd done? Could I ever look at her and not remember her with someone else, laughing, smiling, lying? "Maybe you're right," I said finally. "Maybe you did lose something. But so did I. I lost you long before I even knew it." She looked down, her face a mixture of regret and helplessness, realizing that there might be nothing left to salvage. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. I knew now what I had to do. This wasn't about anger or revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming my life, about building something real and honest. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't do that with Emma in it. Later that day, I sat her down one last time. "Emma, I don't think we can come back from this," I began, my voice steady. "There's too much that's broken, and no amount of promises or apologies is going to make it right. I need to move on." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, accepting the finality of my words. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. For everything." We agreed to a clean break, and over the following days, she began packing her things, each box a reminder of the life we'd shared and the life we'd now leave behind. Watching her go was painful, but a strange sense of peace settled over me. It was over, and now, I could finally start to heal. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. The house felt empty, but I filled the spaces with pieces of myself I'd neglected over the years. I reconnected with friends, joined a weekend hiking group, and even started volunteering, finding meaning in places I'd never looked before. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I'd catch myself remembering the good times with Emma, moments that felt so genuine and irreplaceable. But each time, I reminded myself of the truth, of the reality I'd uncovered, and the pain would ground me, pushing me forward. I took things day by day, sometimes hour by hour, but slowly, I began to feel like myself again. One evening, just as I was settling in with a book, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Emma. I hadn't heard from her since she'd moved out, and seeing her name on the screen made my heart skip a beat. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm moving out of state. I wanted to give you space, and I think this is the best way to do it. I wish you all the happiness in the world, you deserve it." The message felt like closure. There was no more bitterness, no anger, just a quiet understanding that our paths had diverged, and that we'd both carry our own scars forward. I didn't reply, but for the first time, I felt like I could truly let go. Months turned into a year, and life took on a new rhythm. I'd found stability, even happiness, and though my heart was cautious, I knew it was open again. One day, while at a friend's gathering, I met someone, a woman named Lily. She was kind, genuine, someone who radiated warmth without even trying. We talked for hours that night, connecting over everything from our favorite books to life's unexpected twists. We took things slowly, but over time, I felt a new kind of love growing, one built on trust, transparency, and shared dreams. I hadn't planned on meeting anyone, but life, it seemed, had a way of surprising me in the best ways. Looking back now, I can see that the pain I went through with Emma wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I'd learned to trust again, to love myself, and to find happiness in the most honest way possible. And with Lily by my side, I knew that I'd finally built a life that was truly mine. The past was behind me, but the lessons I'd learned would carry me forward into a future I could believe in. As my relationship with Lily blossomed, I found myself rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried for years. With her, there were no hidden secrets, no uneasy feelings lingering beneath the surface, just an authentic connection built on honesty and kindness. Our days were filled with laughter, spontaneous road trips, and quiet moments at home that made me feel like I was finally exactly where I belonged. But I knew that, in order to truly move forward, I needed to make peace with my past. One afternoon, I went through old photos and mementos from my life with Emma, packing them into a box. Instead of anger or sadness, I felt a strange sense of acceptance. Those memories were real, but they no longer had a hold on me. I was ready to close that chapter once and for all. Just as I taped up the box and moved it into storage, a notification popped up on my phone. It was from an anonymous social media account, something I'd never seen before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. It read, "You don't know me, but I have some information about Emma. I think you'll want to see this." My heart raced. After all this time, Emma was the last person I expected to hear about. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let sleeping dogs lie, but something told me I needed to know. I messaged back cautiously, asking what this was about. The reply was immediate, "It's better if we meet. This concerns both of you, and I think it's something you should be aware of before moving forward in your life. Let's meet at the park on 5th Street tomorrow at noon." The mystery of it all left me unsettled. I had moved on from Emma, and whatever this person had to say, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. But the nagging thought that there might be something important made me decide to go. The next day, I arrived at the park, scanning the area for anyone who might be waiting. After a few minutes, a man in his late 40s approached me, introducing himself as someone who had once worked closely with Emma. He looked around nervously, as if worried someone might recognize him. "What is this about?" I asked, feeling the unease settle into my stomach. He handed me a sealed envelope. "This might not change anything for you, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. Emma, she was involved in something more complicated than just an affair. She got tangled up with people she couldn't walk away from, and that's why she ended things with you the way she did." I stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about? What people?" He hesitated. The actor she was seeing, he wasn't just a fling. He was part of a group of high-profile individuals who, let's say, blur the lines between work and pleasure. She got swept up in their lifestyle, and by the time she realized the damage it was doing, it was too late to back out. She left because she wanted to protect you. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what he was saying. Emma had always seemed so grounded. The idea of her being caught up in something this wild seemed almost surreal. But the envelope in my hands felt real enough. Before I could ask any more questions, the man walked away, leaving me with the envelope. Inside, I found a series of photos and notes, detailing the extent of Emma's involvement. It was a lifestyle that went beyond anything I'd imagined, a web of parties, influence, and secrets that I couldn't believe she'd been a part of. I sat in the park for what felt like hours, going through each piece of information, each photograph, feeling a strange sense of closure. In some ways, it was comforting to know that her betrayal wasn't just about me, that she'd been swept up into a life that had clouded her judgment and pulled her away. In others, it hurt to realize how little I had truly known her. As I walked home, I felt a shift within me. The mystery of her actions had finally been explained, and though it didn't erase the pain, it made the past feel like something I could truly leave behind. The woman I'd once loved had been lost long before I realized it, and knowing that made it easier to let her go. When I got home, I placed the envelope in the same box with the other memories and sealed it shut, vowing to leave it all behind for good. Months passed, and the shadows of my past grew fainter. Lily and I continued to build a life together, one filled with honesty, warmth, and a genuine partnership. With her, I felt like I'd found a fresh start, a life where I could be open, vulnerable, and truly happy. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, Lily looked over at me, her hand resting gently on mine. "I don't know everything you went through, but I'm grateful for it," she said softly. "It brought you here, to me." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "It did. And I wouldn't change a thing." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a peace settle over me, a peace that came from knowing that I had truly moved on. The betrayal, the heartbreak, even the unexpected revelations had all led me to this moment. I was finally free, ready to live a life built on trust, love, and resilience. And as I looked into Lily's eyes, I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was exactly where I was meant to be.